Thoth Hermes podcast. Welcome to the world of the Western esoteric tradition.
Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to a new episode 11 of Season 8 of the Thoth Hermes podcast. Today is May the 8th, 2022, and my name is Rudolf. I am your host and the creator of this podcast. And I have to say it right at the beginning, if you haven't yet gone to Kaikobad Radio, the other product that I just launched about 10 days ago, well, do so now. I can try to spell Kaikobad to you. Here it's Keikobad. But it's easier that you go to the Thoth Hermes podcast and you find the link right there on the top of the Thoth Hermes podcast website, thotheremes.com, and you will find it. And I promise there will be better publicity, better links coming in the next few days and weeks. For the radio, of course, I mean. Okay, today here on this episode, my guest is a very special guest. It's Rawn Clark. Rawn, who is a bit shy about interviews in general, and I was very happy that he accepted to come on the show. He who has, in the English-speaking world, but not only there, made the name of Franz Barden very much more popular than it used to be before he came. Right, so we will have a lovely talk with him in a few moments. I would like to welcome all of you here on this show. Those of you who are new to this show, welcome. Go and discover the website I just mentioned, thothehermes.com, because not only we'll find show notes for this very show, but of course for all the about 125 episodes back, and everyone can find the links there to the authors' pages, to other information regarding the subject we're treating, to the music that we play. And it would be great if you did that. And while you're there, why not leave me also some voicemail, because you can leave a voicemail on the web page, on the homepage. Or, of course, there's a contact form. You send me a message. And just lately, I had a few very interesting feedback messages from guys that are listening out there and who made some suggestions for guests for the show. And I cannot always take them in, but I do regularly, and there will be some of the suggestions will bear fruit in the near future. That's really great that you're doing that. Also, I need, again, your music. I need your music both for here and for the radio station, both for Thoth Hermes podcast and Kaikobad Radio. So do send me your music if it's your genuine music, if it's you who has written it or performed it, or both. And that would be great to be able to play you on the show like I did many, many times before. Now it's your turn. So, and talking about your turn, it should be a good turn of you to go to the Patreon website and look for Thoth Hermes podcast, become a patron like some others have already done. And thanks to everyone who is supporting the show. Also, not only by listening, which is great, but also by your financial contributions, because we need that. We need that to expand. We need to maintain even this show. And it's a great contribution that you give us here. So keep going. And well, those of you who have not yet done, it's those people who pay that make it possible that you all listen. So it would be nice to be show a bit more solidarity and be a few more of you who become patrons. Patreon.com, Thoth Hermes podcast, or on the website of the Thoth Hermes podcast. There is the Patreon button. Go there and use it. Thank you. Okay, so I think it's now time for some music. this time again, the music is rather eclectic, I would say. I got it from different places, and the first is by an artist called Lars. I would pronounce him Love by the first name. I guess he's from the north of Europe. Lars sounds like that, but I'm not sure if it's Lars Lowe, Lowe, or Lars Love. I find him in my researches on different channels where you can get interesting and copyright-free music. So, and it was also not only the music that I liked, it was also the title, which is a perfect fit for what is to come in the interview later on. So the concept of You and I is the title of that song that we are going to hear now. And so let's go and do that. Let's listen to Lars Love and the concept of You and I. Concept of You and I by Lars Love, which opened our musical trio of this episode, and a little eclectic one once again this week on episode 11 of season 8, where we welcome the great Rawn Clark. Rawn, I can't even tell if it was the website, which I believe it was first, or the book, but both were called A Barden Companion. I am sure that many of you out there are aware of Franz Barden, of that famous hermeticist, occultist, who lived in what was then Czechoslovakia between the wars. He was most active, and he created that whole Bardonian system of initiation, a mostly solitary initiation system. You will hear all about that when we discuss that with Rawn. And by what happened immediately during the war and afterwards, and of course, because first it was Nazi Germany who oppressed him and all those free-thinking subjects, and then it was the communist system who also did not allow that. In the meantime, when Barden had also died, his work was published, and it was complicated, and most of it was written in Czech language. So it took some time, and Rawn was really instrumental in bringing it out into the world with his abardencompanion.com website. And that website was so important and grew to something really big that it was when he decided a few years ago it was now enough. He had given to the world what we had to give in that respect. The website was copied by a German guy, thanks to him, and of course Rawn is fully aware of that and agrees to that. That website is now called abardencompanion.de, but it's still mostly in English. It's just because it's hosted in Germany, and it needed to make a distinction between what was there before. It's the old version, but still the main material is there. It's really great. You'll find the link also in the show notes. Franz Barden has, of course, and I'm mentioning this here in this intro to the interview, has, of course, had also many people who came in his system after him, and maybe one of the most important of those is Emil Steinar. Emil Steinar, who is now more than 80 years old. He lives here in Vienna, and I know him personally, of course, and I speak to him very regularly on the phone. I've often tried to talk him into an interview, but A, he doesn't speak English, and B, he is a bit shy about that, even shyer than Rawn, who, he said very spontaneously yes when I asked him, which makes me happy. But Emil Steinar, he has written about a dozen books based on the Bardonian system and developing it further into his own versions. And many of you have asked me, do those books by Emil Steinar also exist in English? And I always had to say no. And I can tell you that some of them now, about half of them, have already been translated and are published now in English language. So Emil Steinar's books are out there in English language now. The rest will follow. He's very keen to have that done very quickly. So I will, of course, post a special post on the show notes page for those books by Emil Steinar, because so many of you have, over the years, asked me about that. It's not the first time that we talk about Franz Barden here on the show, of course. It was in my talk with Martin Fox. That was a point. Also, others who appeared on the show have talked about him. So Barden is really an important figure. And now with Rawn, we are going to go in depth into that question. This episode is named Work Thyself. A bit, you will hear it in the show. It came up, that term, because everybody talks about know thyself. Yes, but you have to do the work. So work thyself in order to advance in the occult art. That's what we learn from not only Franz Barden, but also from him, and especially from Rawn, who tells us very, very clearly that that has to be the path. Right. I think we just go there and now talk to my friend Rawn Clark, because it is really for him that we do this episode. You're all waiting for that. It's quite extraordinary that we have him on the show, and I'm very happy about that. Let's go to Northern California, where he resides, and meet Rawn Clark. And I will come back in about 33 minutes with some music. For the moment, enjoy.
Here comes the interview.
Well, a few days ago, I went onto the internet and I was looking up new books, and I saw, to my biggest pleasure, that on April 17, a new book was published by somebody I really like, by Rawn Clark. Rawn Clark published that new book, which is called Book of Aries, I believe. And yes. I said, Rawn Clark, I have to contact him. People always tell me he doesn't like to give interviews, but I just give it a try. And well, what happened? 20 minutes later, we had this interview fixed. And Rawn, it's an enormous pleasure. And I know not only for me, but for many, many people out there, to welcome you here today on the Thoth Hermes podcast. Welcome, Rawn. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, I must say.
Well, thank you. No, it's great because, of course, the ABC, as it was called among the ones who knew, a Barden Companion, that was the website in English language about Franz Barden and his work and about all around him. And you, Rawn, were the creator of that. You were I don't know if you would see it like that, but I see it in a way that you were the promoter of Franz Barden's work in the English language at some point. Would you see it like that as well?
Well, it sort of evolved that way. It wasn't my plan. But it turned out I was the one making most of the sales for Merker Books. When they published Initiation into Hermetics, it sort of just blew me away. It was, I'm just doing this stuff. I'm not, planning to be famous, or it kind of freaks me out, actually.
Okay, but well, I know the feeling, but I think you really did that. And I may say that even though the website, the Barden Companion, doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but some guy in Germany made an online copy of it, which is now available under abardencompanion.de. So it's an older version, I think, right?
Yeah, it's the 2015 or 14 version, something like that. My latest version before I closed the site was much more advanced in terms of a website,
Absolutely.
I learned.
But still, it's important that it's still there, and we're all happy it is, because
the content is basically the same. I've always just published everything on the website. So.
Right, and it's a great resource for everything around Franz Barden in English. No, it's not only English, actually. Not only English, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, of course, the obvious question, the first question I want and need to ask you, Rawn, what brought you to Franz Barden in the first place? How did you come to his work, and what did it mean to you in the first place?
It's a common story, of just happening onto the book. I hear this tale all the time from people. They just happen upon the book. I had been doing just huge amounts of study on occultism, and I came across the words Kabbalah and Hermetics, and, little lights went on in my head. So I started to pursue them, and read a lot of Golden Dawn stuff, the usual dreck, the usual crap. and just opened myself to whatever I could find. And I was house cleaning at the time. And in the library of the house that I was cleaning were two books, Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice and Franz Barden's Initiation into Hermetics. And I asked the house owner if I could borrow them and read them both. And I took them home with me. And first one I read was Aleister Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice. Well, I say read, but I didn't get very far. It just made me sick. It just made me sick. The amount of ego, that Victorian sort of way of writing, and it was just felt silly. And I didn't learn anything about magic from that book. So I put it down and picked up Initiation to Hermetics, and I've been reading it since. And that was, almost 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
Almost 40 years. Geez.
So you were in your early 20s then, right?
Yeah, I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And, within just a few months, I had my own copy of the Rugeberg edition, which those days wasn't all that rare. It was the only English edition. And that's how it began. And what I found immediately in reading Initiation to Hermetics, it was like the first chapter was like, oh my God, thank you. There was something that was going to take me where I wanted to go, not just fill me with a whole lot of dogma. It didn't tell me how to think. It said, here's the way you can figure it out for yourself. And I was sold.
That's certainly one of the major features of Barden's writings, in my sense, that he just gives you the stuff and lets you do it, basically, and doesn't prescribe the color of your wand, so to speak.
Right. At the same time, though, it's designed in such a way that it takes you through really predictable stages of development. It's sort of inevitable outcomes that aren't apparent necessarily from just the initial reading. But it's very clever, very clever.
Yeah. So we here on this podcast, of course, there are many people around who know their way around occultism and stuff, but still, I think we will need to talk about more in detail about Barden and his concept and the way he approaches things. So you are certainly the person to do that. But before we go there, Ron, let's talk a little bit more about yourself, if I may. So you said early 20s you discovered those books, but by a genuine interest in that world of the occult and Hermeticism. So how did that appear? When did that appear? And how did it just come out of the blue, or did you have personal experiences? Or
it's sort of like as far back as I can remember. My earliest memories are of being in the woods and, just this magical place. This is maybe when I was 4, something like that. And so I've always had this sense of the world being alive and magical. And that just developed all through my life,
And did your parents think you were a weird child, or did they support
well,
that?
They did, but that was cool, This was the 60s, So,
of course.
We are certainly encouraged me. They were agnostic, atheists, Unitarians, if that means anything. So they were very open, and eventually they joined the Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa
Right.
Yogananda. It's amazing. A lot of us Bardenists have history with the Self-Realization Fellowship as well.
Absolutely interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at that time you lived in California also?
Yeah. I've lived in California I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Really? My
Yes.
goodness.
Thankfully, my parents left when I can't remember anything of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we came to California, so I was saved.
So when you went to the city library or whatever, would you find books about the occult, about esotericism at that time?
No. I never, as a child, I never read anything. Well, I read Carlos Castaneda. There was sort of the 60s version of occultism. But no, I never read anything. It wasn't until my 20s that I really started consuming books, just consuming them.
Right. Well, I must admit here for the first time ever that I have a soft spot for Castaneda's books because it was through them that I entered a bit into that world of well, later on you see them more skeptical maybe. Let's go back to Franz Barden then. At the time in the 60s, how was it in America? I can't really speak about my country here because I had no idea about him at the time at all. But when you discovered him, was that common esoteric literature or was that very rare at the time?
Well, this was in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And no, it was very rare. There was nobody was, interested in Franz Barden. There was one fellow who put out a newsletter out of somewhere in Colorado that I connected with a couple years later. But that was it. There was absolutely no. But this was before the internet. That made all the difference. That's what enabled all of my work is the internet.
Of course. And I also believe his personal story, of course, especially in my part of the world, which is very close to where he comes from. The history of, the Second World War and fascist Germany, and then with communist Czechoslovakia. Of course, this was not at all the field where something like that would be able to grow.
Right, yeah. It still maintained itself in the Czech Republic. There's a very strong Bardenist community there.
Absolutely. So tell those who don't know much about Barden a bit more. What is so particular about Franz Barden that spoke to you and that nowadays speaks to so many of us?
Well, I think it's his plain speaking. There's no flowery language. He gets right down to basic exercises that you can do to develop yourself. And it follows this sequence of 10 steps, that are progressive. So it's like a college course in initiation, and it is self-initiation. That's what really turned me on. I'd been through an occult group, and there was just too many personalities, and it ended up being about the personalities involved and not about the actual magical working or education. So I found in Barden this, laid out in front of me from the outset, this path of exercises that I could accomplish, and it all sounded so believable, like it was really his own genuine experience. And so when I started doing the exercises, it started working. I got immediate results.
What were those results in the beginning? So when you started with it, what did you feel?
The main benefit that I gained was this transformation of my personality. I really blossomed as an individual through this work. Going into it, I was sort of nowhere to be found. I was sort of like not there, but I was there. I always felt secondary. I would sort of stand back. Other people would do things. I wasn't really truly engaged in my life. And through this work, I became engaged. I became who I am. Let's put it that way.
You became rooted and
yes, exactly. There's this sort of metaphor that I learned fairly early on, having to do with the personality. We are a ship in the middle of a vast ocean, buffeted by waves. And so, and the personality has no rooting. It, goes up and down and up and down and side to side, and it's just really battered around. But the idea of the personality transformation is you become anchored and stable and, centrally focused, not buffeted by the waves. The waves still happen, but you don't have to follow those waves up and down.
Right.
And that's what I got from the initial work. But there's also the work with the elements. My first contact with the elements was fairly early on. And that was like, whoa, this shit is real. And the vital energy, all these early things were very important.
When you looked at that, that's one of the two things that struck me the most with Barden in the beginning, that when you start talking about the elements, he uses a slightly different structure, let's put it that way, than the classical Hermetism, right? The attribution of the four elements is slightly different. Why, in your sense, is that, and what does it change in regards to the old classical Neoplatonic Hermeticism?
I'll have to expose my ignorance here. I'm not a scholar. I really don't know that much about classical Neoplatism and the how that philosophy of the elements differs from what Barden presents.
Tell us about Barden.
Well, what Barden describes, first of all, Barden uses words very specifically. It's kind of hard to tell in the English translation, but he talks about the element, the principle of the elements, and then the elements themselves.
Yes.
So there's sort of two sets of correspondences here. The elemental principle, a fire being, very radiant, very aggressive, very active. Water being very calm, very magnetic. It draws in, it creates forms, etc. The elements as he describes them he gives just enough description so that you can connect with the element through the method that he describes. using the creative visualization. You use the creative imagination to create these sensations, these visualizations, and you do that enough with the intention, the will behind it, you do connect with the factual elements. It's sort of unavoidable. You will eventually connect. So that gives you a whole new perspective on the elements, because it's not exactly as he described it. It's more than he described it. And you find that throughout Barden's writings, that the actual experience is more than the description. And that's kind of the magic of it. But he takes that, he then assumes in the next step that you will have learned that it is more. And so he works on that assumption. So if you haven't, then you just don't get anywhere. And you really don't understand what he is saying fully. If you haven't done the exercises and completed them successfully.
Yes. What you just mentioned, magnetism, I mean, that's one, I think, of the main differences to other forms of Hermetism, this distinction between electricity and magnetism within the description of the four elements. So maybe you can explain a bit on that, how he uses that, Barden himself, because I think that will be important to our listeners to know and understand.
Well, there are two opposite forces, essentially, but they are conjoined. You can't have electric without magnetic. You can have magnetic without electric. And this is simple physics. So it borrows a lot from physics in that sense. And in Bardenism, we have the two fluids, the electric fluid and the magnetic fluid. And this is really what is behind the fire and the water. Mm-hmm. The fluids create the elements, and it's because of the fluids that we find the electric in the fire and the magnetic in the water. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But some of this just seems so self-obvious to me, because it's sort of what I've grown up in,
of course.
That the electric fluid is electric. Hey, magnetic fluid, magnetic, But it's on all these different levels, too. You start to relate this to the Kabbalistic tree of life, and it becomes much more complex. I'm trying to define which pillar is electric and which magnetic and why. And, you get these different conflicts with these different philosophies, different approaches to the tree of life.
Absolutely. And that was the next step I was going to come to. The tree of life is a very particular way of handling the tree of life, as opposed to others. As you say, everybody seems to have their own view on it. But he has a very particular and very structured view on the tree of life, hasn't he?
Yeah, he doesn't really speak about the tree of life anywhere. He sort of hints at it in Key to the True Kabbalah, but he doesn't come outright and talk about the tree of life. He kind of mentions a few Sephirot here and there, but there's no structure to it,
Okay. And is it you who have to find the structure as a
Key to the True Kabbalah? Yes, definitely. Oh, the key to the true Kabbalah is so sketchy that you have to do the majority of the work yourself. You really do have to have completed step 8 before you can really make any sense out of KTQ. People really underestimate that book.
Yeah, I think so too, because it's kind of, everybody talks about the initiation into Hermetics, but the other one is then often put aside
well, it seems nowadays that's changed a lot, because everybody just jumps immediately to practice magical evocation or the key to the Kabbalah. I hear about people practicing KTQ after only reading it just last week, and having never broken open the pages of Initiation into Hermetics, or jumping right into evocation,
Can be dangerous stuff, right?
Well, not so much dangerous, it's really a waste of time. If you really sincerely, want to advance yourself, you don't do these things, you do the work.
Yeah.
That's the really hard lesson for this modern day and age is you just got to do the work. Most people are not willing to do the work. They want to read and become enlightened.
Yeah, exactly. Through reading, and that's a problem. Yeah, exactly. What strikes me, maybe I'm generalizing here, but sometimes you have to a bit. When I speak to people who practice, who really practice Barden, and I know quite a few, right?
Oh, cool.
They all seem to be rather calm personalities, like yourself, rather calm personalities. They seem very balanced in themselves. And would you say that's one of the key features when you practice his stuff that brings you to that point?
Yes, the whole focus of the first 3 to 4 steps of initiation in Hermetics, and we're talking a year of work, of constant, head-on work.
At the minimum for the 4 steps, right? At the minimum.
You have a minimum for 3, yeah. That is all about the transformations of personality and reaching for the astral equilibrium of the elements, which is balancing all these parts of the personality. I like to call it positivizing all the parts of the personality, taking the negative traits, finding what the positive root was, where that negative trait was given birth back when you were a little child, usually. What positive need were you trying to meet at that time, and bring that positive root out in the trait and positivize the negative trait. And that has a very balancing effect. That's the know
thyself in his version, right?
Yes. That is that's what initiation into Hermetics is all about. Know thyself. And it's not just know your personality, it's know the whole of self, because there's a whole lot more to ourselves than our personal ego, and so initiation in Hermetics is the journey of really, really sincerely getting to know yourself, every part of yourself.
We just mentioned Castaneda in the beginning, and that reminds me in general of shamanism, and serious shamanists often talk about those 3 levels, the underworld, and the other world, as opposed to the world that we live in.
Right. Uh-huh.
And I sometimes have the feeling that Barden, more than other Hermeticists, if to generalize again, uses those. He doesn't mention the 3 worlds, but he uses this natural experience which can lead to 3 worlds, to the dark side in yourself, also to the brighter side than you are in the real life world, and bring those 3 together into one personality. Am I fantasizing here, or would you have similar experience with that?
I put in a different context. I don't do dark and light and these sort of symbols that, there's nothing wrong with darkness. The nighttime gets a bad,
Exactly.
It's, we are just immense. The spectrum of existence that is covered by one single human being is immense. And it includes all of these things. So to me, it's about knowing all those parts of self, you know, identifying them, understanding them, learning from them, and learning how to put them all together in a positive way. That's what it's all about for me. In my latest book, I talk about clearing the channel between the I and the lower, this physical here in the present moment of time, space, body. And that's what initiation is. It's making that connection between the very highest, I put that in quotes, the highest level of all awareness and this infinitely finite bit of awareness that we are. And that, opens up the wholeness of self. And that to me is when we're capable of true magical action, when we're that integrated. Right. It's all about integration of self.
May I pick up one thing that you just said and ask you to deepen that a little bit? What now within Barden and beyond or beside Barden, what is initiation? What for you, how would you define initiation?
It's one of those words that just doesn't fit,
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
Word,
maybe you have a personal, maybe you have a personal view on it.
For me, it's know thyself. That is initiation. Knowing myself, discovering what self is, and what myself is, and how it all interrelates. It's just the process of discovery. And for me, it's very structured, and that's what I benefited from with Barden. It's very structured, and that's, my personality. I need that kind of structure.
Structure is a word that comes often in your writings as well. I have the impression that's something that's important to you, right?
Yeah, well, it's like the tree of life to me is,
right.
It's the structure that I see reflected in everything. So.
Yeah. So when you say initiation, then does that mean once you started to know yourself, then so initiation is just a beginning, as the Latin root of the word would say, and where does it lead?
Yeah, see, it means we use it in a way that means more than just beginning. I think originally when you're thinking about an initiation into a lodge, it's the beginning of your process with the lodge. So we've just sort of adopted that word because
it's more than that, right?
Yeah. It's the process. The whole journey is the initiation because, hey, it's never ending. We're always learning new things and new experiences. That's the nature of life.
Absolutely. Lucky us, aren't we?
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be kind of boring.
Absolutely. It's so lovely to talk to Rawn. Such a fresh air, fresh wind that blows when you speak to him. No, really nice guy. And I hope you're enjoying just as much as I do. Right, so as promised, there will be some more music now, eclectic music, I promised today. And we have somebody who already was here on the show. I believe twice I played her music already. Heather, who does extraordinary, some kind of, folkish music at some point, but she also does those meditational music bits. And that's one of those that we're going to play here in the break of the interview, so to relax a bit, to think a bit about things. So this song, this meditation is called In Principio, in the beginning. And I think also by the titles, the choice of the music here today goes quite well with all that we speak about in this interview. So upcoming next, it's Heather Dale with In Principio, an incantation, as she calls those songs. After incantation number 1, named In Principio, we will return to Northern California, to Rawn, to continue to know why we have to work ourselves. And after the interview, in the end, there is the third piece of music, and that is simply called Heart, and it's by an artist named Ackerman. So this is the program that's coming up in the next altogether 45 minutes or so. And at the end of the third song, after Heart by Ackerman, I will come back and tell you what's coming up next week in the Thoth Hermes podcast. Right, so, but let's now go to listen to Heather Dale and In Principio, and after that return to my friend Rawn Clark. Enjoy. Let's go to those steps. We come back to your work and your books in a minute, but before we go there, I think we talk about 10 steps in general, right? When we speak about the Barden initiation system structure, so to speak, right? And the impression that you get sometimes is that many people would say, and maybe you can explain your feelings why that is, it is extremely demanding, extremely difficult, and there seem many people who give up after step 2 or 3, right? Is that also the impression that you have? And why is that? And it's not just the people, but there might be a reason for that, no?
Yes, there is a reason for that. Number one reason is people misunderstand what Barden has to say in initiation into Hermetics. They have all these preconceptions, thanks to all the New Age literature out there. They have preconceptions about what's expected with each exercise. Like I had this fellow just the other day who wrote to me saying, "Thanks for your video. I was stuck on step 1 for 10 years. But step 1 should take a month. 1 month. That is the level.
What would he get stuck at, for example?
Well, the emptiness of mind is a big sticker for people. Because they think that in the step 1, they have to master emptiness of mind to the same degree as a Buddhist monk who's been doing it for 50 years. Okay. That's just, because that's what they've convinced themselves. Or the focus of the one-pointed focus. They expect the rest of the world to just disappear while they are focused on their point of concentration. But that just doesn't happen. The rest of the world goes on. That horn honks in the distance. The point is you learn how to accept that and have it not interrupt your focus. It still goes on, but it doesn't interrupt you.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you.
So, developing the soul mirror, people get lost in that because it's a confrontation with the most uncomfortable parts of self. That negative mirror.
Do explain the soul mirror, because I think not everybody knows that concept here.
Okay. The soul mirror in Barden's nomenclature is this catalog, this list that you make of your negative and positive traits. And it's 2 lists that are both of equal importance. Most people fear the negative trait list, and they have trouble being honest enough with themselves to really get a healthy, list with a good number of traits. And then they fear the positive list even more, but in a different way. Because, we're taught, you can't brag about yourself.
Okay.
You're supposed to be meek and mild, and so we have just as much trouble delineating the positive aspects of our personality as the negative aspects. So people get stuck there, and they go no further.
Okay.
So what we do with the movement,
poor breathing must be also one of those things that holds people back, doesn't it?
It does, because they, again, haven't understood what's going on. When you do exactly as Barden suggests and breathe, sucking in through the pores of your skin, really sincerely visualize and imagine that this is happening. If you do that, you're sucking in the vital energy.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you pore breathe. Is what you're breathing in, what you're inhaling is vital energy. But they have a different conception of what it is. We don't approach things generally with an open mind. We go into things with a set of assumptions. And those are what get in our way over and over in this path of initiation, especially.
Okay. So you were saying that basically the difficulties that many experience with Barden's path are because they are trying to be too perfect in the first place.
Yes.
Would that summarize it correctly?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, we go into it with unreasonable expectations.
Yeah.
And, really not reading the words that Barden wrote. A lot of people read parts over and over, and then, a couple of years later, read it again, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize he said that. Because I never saw that word in the book.
Is his terminology, you just mentioned terminology when we talk about the mirror, for example, is his terminology very specific, like on another level, Rudolf Steiner, for example? So when you read Steiner, you have to know certain words, how they are employed in his terminology. Is that also true for Barden in a way?
Yes, it is. I think it's true for every writer. I certainly have developed this sort of Rawnian vocabulary that makes sense when I use it.
That's a nice one, the Rawnian vocabulary. I like that. Yeah. Now I see what you mean. Sure. Yeah. But it's. I get the feeling with Barden it is stronger than with others, isn't it?
I guess. I don't know, because I've encountered that in every thing that I've ever read. Try reading an ancient Kabbalistic document.
Yeah, no, of course. No, of course, you're absolutely right. So
it's just a matter of getting used to the vocabulary that he uses.
We were throwing out those names, initiation into Hermetics here and the true Kabbalah, etc. Can you just maybe, for those who are beginners in the Baronian world, maybe mention the main works that we are talking about here?
Okay. He has three main books that have been published that were written by him. Totally, for certain. The first and foremost is Initiation into Hermetics with its 10 steps. Then came the practice of magical evocation, which is about, performing evocations. And that, according to what he wrote, is to be pursued only after one has completed step 8 of initiation to Hermetics. That's just a basic fundamental level of development that you need in order to genuinely perform an evocation. Now, evocation for him is primarily process of mental wandering. The evocation, what we call an evocation itself, is really sort of secondary. He teaches you the techniques, but it is all dependent upon you mentally wandering to the realm of the being you're trying to make contact with, making contact at a mental level and making an agreement with that being that they will, evoke however you're evoking them.
And he's talking about 360 levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
He talks about the beings of the elements. Mm-hmm. He talks about the beings of the zone girdling the earth at 360 degrees of the zodiac. Yes. Mm-hmm. And then the beings of the planetary spheres. So it's sort of a hierarchy, starting with the elemental beings, then the zone girdling the earth, and then beyond, from the moon on up. Okay. And that's, infinitely expansive work,
Of course. It sounds like it, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then his third book is called The Key to the True Kabbalah. And he spells Kabbalah in this odd way, Q-U-A-B-B-L. Yeah, Kabbalah. Which he does, I think, for a very specific reason, but having to do with the associations with the letters. He has the qua, that sound in his letters. But this is unlike any Kabbalah anywhere else written down in the universe. It's about Kabbalistic speech, uttering the letters Kabbalistically. And he doesn't specifically use the Hebrew letters. He does kind of, but he's using the Germanic letters than the Hebrew letters, although they are closely related.
So it's about sound a lot also.
Yes,
right?
It is. It's all about speaking the letters and speaking them individually and in combination. And that's very advanced work. And he says, again, you have to have completed step 8 before even beginning to work with his method of Kabbalah. Because there's a lot of using the creative imagination in there too, because it's more than just sound, it's color, it's sensation, it's meaning, it's what he calls legality, it's meaning. All of these things are involved in Kabbalistic utterance.
So what would you think? I mean, I know it is difficult to establish that, but somebody who took up the work, you said it's about 1 month for step 1, but in order to get to step 8 in a serious way so that you can start working with the 2 other books, how much time would that take a serious student in your sense?
It varies so radically from person to person. I would say at least 5 years.
Right.
I would say at least 5 years with someone who's fairly gifted. And has.
I was going to say that he must be quite good if he's going there in 5 years, probably. Yeah, he or she. Yeah. Absolutely. But it's. Once again, you said that earlier, but it is a solitary path, right? There are no Bardonic group workings, right?
Well, there are. There's all kinds of groups around that I don't know how they do it. It's never made any sense to me. But there are, there's in Prague, there's a group of Barden students who do regular work together, and there are around the world. A lot of them, the groups that I'm aware of people who get together, and they include a lot in the Barden work. It's not just Barden work that they're doing, but Barden is part of it, so to speak. But, whatever path you're following, you got to do the work yourself. It always comes down to what you're doing. This isn't the sort of thing where you just sit at the foot of the guru and the guru, gives you all this information and evolves you. It doesn't work that way in Hermetics. It doesn't really work that way anywhere, because eventually, as lifetimes go by, you got to do the work yourself.
So work yourself, would that kind of be a motto if you work Bardonic?
I would think so, yeah. And just do it. It's probably the big phrase in advertising.
Yeah. But when you say just do it, that brings me, of course, to you now, to you yourself. What made you create that great website resource? What made you start doing more than just your own personal practice? What was the motivation behind that? Did that come from the Barden work, or is that something exterior to it?
I think it came from the Barden work. It really started back in 1992. I think 92. I was involved in a discussion group on AOL. Only us old folk remember AOL.
Oh, absolutely.
And
us old folk, we are about the same age,
Yeah. That veered off into hermetics as a subject. And I was inspired in that conversation. It came up about the hermetic, the Emerald Tablet and the meaning of the Emerald Tablet. And some ideas were offered that I thought were just bull. They were just really wild, out there kind of garbage. And so I wrote a commentary in segments about the Emerald Tablet. That was sort of my first writing that I did. And it just blossomed from there. Being involved in conversations with people on discussion groups. There was then Yahoo groups and, all this kind of thing. And I did that for quite a few years. And that's where it all started, really, because, writing answers to people and their queries about initiation to hermetics is how the first commentary came about. It was, built from answers that I was giving online.
And you then started also writing your own books, right? You started. Yeah. What was the first of those books that on Barden that you wrote?
The first book that was ever published was A Barden Companion. My initial commentary on initiation to hermetics. Practice of magical evocation, key to the true Kabbalah.
And what would you say does it add for the practitioner when he starts? What does it add to the Barden texts? Don't be shy. I know it does.
Well, I think the main thing that it added was a sense of camaraderie. Someone talking to you that has been through these exercises. Mm-hmm. That, I think, was the greatest value for people, because I read it now and I think, oh God, my second commentary on initiation to hermetics was far better than that, just far better. And then my third commentary, the video on the companions along the way, was even better.
Well, so good.
It gets better every 10 years. If I live another 10 years, there's probably going to be another one. Dear.
And you just issued also the 10th anniversary edition of the 8 Temples meditation, right?
Well, I did that on the 10th anniversary, which was whenever it was. Well, it was 2010 was the 10th anniversary. 2012 was the 10th anniversary, because the 8 Temples was published at the same time, almost the same time, as the first edition of Barden Companion.
Okay.
Then 10 years later, I did my second edition of both.
Okay. So what is the Eight Temples Meditation Project? What is that?
Okay, the Eight Temples is something I wrote quite a long time ago. I basically wrote it in 1997 and then performed it in 1998, throughout the first 8 months of 1998. It was... I had been studying Kabbalah for years, and some friends that I was in a group with, we were doing work around astral meeting, and trying to work out techniques that functioned reliably for what we were doing. There was interest expressed in learning about Kabbalah, learning about the Tree of Life. And so I designed and performed a series of 8 rituals every full moon. And these rituals were experiences of the 8, what I thought at that point of as the 8 planetary sephirot of the Tree of Life. Now,
Keter and Chokmah, right? So,
right.
Yeah,
My exposure to the Tree of Life at that point had been only the Western Hermetic one, the Golden Dawn version of the Tree of Life, right? Mm-hmm. And in the Western Hermetic, the planets are assigned to the sephirot. Of course, in Hebrew Kabbalah, they're not. They don't have any association with the
Absolutely,
sephirot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that then, so I designed this experience of the planetary sephirot. So that they are experiences of the sephirot, but with a planetary bent. You know, they're influenced by the planets, So these rituals were attended by the original participants in the Eight Temples Meditation Project. There were about, a dozen of us, I think, in the original working. They attended them astromentally. In other words, they projected their awareness into using the mechanism that I provided, the ritual that I provided. They joined me in the working at that time, and had these experiences, sort of a guided meditation with little intervals of independent action for each of the 8 sephirot. What I was able to do is preserve those moments of astromental space, so that they could be revisited by other people in the future. So those original experiences can be revisited, and anybody following the procedure that I lay out in the book can benefit from those original rituals.
Is this and the other books of the same vein, are they only accessible mentally, for people who have practiced pardon, or anybody seriously involved into that work?
I designed it to be anybody with a rudimentary ability with creative imagination. That's all it takes, a little creative imagination.
Yeah.
You know, someone familiar a little bit with meditating wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
You know.
The
ability to use, control the awareness, focus it.
It's 9 books, I believe, that you have published so far, right?
Eight books.
Okay.
8 books, yeah.
Okay. So tell us more about, not about the love letter. We talk about that a bit later, but about the other ones. Tell us a bit more about them.
So Eight Temples was written in 1997 and performed in 98. Then another book that I have is A Center of Stillness, Meditation, Healing, and Self-Knowledge, I think.
Right.
That is a combination of several things that I've written over the years, starting from about 1994 was when I really started writing things. And that contains a Center of Stillness meditation, which is a really basic meditation using your creative imagination to really isolate your awareness, isolate it from the seven senses that I recognize in the in this meditation. You know, the usual five physical senses plus the emotional tone. I consider that a sense. Basically, it's a sensory organ as we navigate the world, and the mind chatter, you know, which narrates everything constantly. That I include as a sense, because it really is part of our sensory apparatus that we use to integrate into the world. So this meditation about isolating your awareness from all of that noise and just being in that center of stillness. Then in there is the Rawn's self-healing Archaeus.
Yes.
Which is a very alchemical process that has to do with the self. Know thyself again. It is about integrating into the physical body, integrating into the astral body, and integrating into the mental body, and then a process of separating these bodies from the physical shell, letting them rest and reintegrating them. So it's about solve et coagula, you know, open it all up, blow it all apart, and then put it back together. And
but in a very practical way, yes.
Yes. And this really is about knowing yourself and experiencing all the aspects of self, you know, using that structure, that's inherent in Barden, inherent in the Tree of Life, etc. Then there is the magic of Yod-He Vav-He Adonai. And this is a very mystical sort of work, centered around a Hebrew canticle, which you say to a specific tune, and you perform certain energy work while you're doing it. And if you do all this correctly and open up the connections between different aspects of yourself, a specific kind of light is generated. A specific kind of light that only human beings can generate, which I call the Adonai light, the rainbow-hued Adonai light. And then you learn to do various magical things with that Adonai light. And then let's see what else is in there.
I think we have the 231 gates of initiation, right?
Oh, well, that comes later, really. That's a different book. There's
Permutations of the Tree.
From my two books on Kabbalah. The 231 gates of initiation came about throughout the 90s. It wasn't until about 1998 that was finally formalized. And that enumerates 231 combinations of Sephiroth that exist within the tree of the Western Hermetic, or as I call it, the Hebrew tree of life, because it uses the truly Hebrew attributions of paths. 231 different forms made by the tree of life, following specific sort of rules, that when you explore them astromentally, you know, using your creative imagination, they make changes within you. It is sort of like Kriya Yoga in that sense. You are doing these things that transform you just by doing them. With the aim of fully integrating the self, following the structure of the tree of life.
Yes.
And then permutations of the tree is the same thing, but with the Gra tree, which is an entirely different approach to the tree of life.
Okay.
It's the tree that I use exclusively now.
Yeah. So Kabbalah for you is really the center of your work nowadays, right?
Yeah, it always has been. It's been, developed along the same timeline as Hermetics,
Also that latest book, I believe, the Book of Aries, is very much about that subject, right?
Yes.
The path of brilliance is, of course, a very Kabbalistic way.
It's all Kabbalistic. Everything.
That's the one that brought us together here. That book. Yeah. But I have to. A book that is also, when you then open it, talks, of course, about Kabbalah. But the book that I wanted to put last is this. I think it was published 3 years ago, which is called "Love Letter to a Dying World: A Handbook for Humanity." A wonderful and beautiful title, which sounds rather pessimistic as a title, but then when you start reading the book, it's everything else than pessimistic, right?
Yeah.
So what inspired you to that?
Pessimism.
Are you pessimistic about the world?
Well, essentially, but it's not really pessimism. It's acceptance above all that, we're sort of at the end of things here, folks. We don't have any chances left. We have essentially killed the livability of our planet. This generation is the last generation, as far as I can see. The last generation to have any sort of ease of existence. The day is coming real quick when we're not going to be able to go to the supermarket. We can't turn on our faucet to get water. That's right. Coming on really quick. We won't have air to breathe. It'll be too hot. So I see what we have done to the earth, what we've done to ourselves. And it's such a pity. And that's where, it comes from in my heart, this sort of sadness that we have done this to ourselves, when it would be so easy to turn around in an instant. It really just takes a tiny little shift in our awareness. But at a global level, that's the thing. It's such a level.
Yeah.
But
in a way, it's only, as you said with the work yourself motto, it's only possible if everybody does it on his or her own level, and only then it will succeed on the global level, isn't it?
In theory.
Yeah, in theory, of course.
What
I'm saying is, it's impossible to say, well, now I, Rudolf, or I, Rawn, I go out into the world and will change everything.
Right.
That will not work either.
No one of us, no single one of us has the power to change the world. That's just egotism. Certainly there's these, royal assholes who have great power and, are currently doing lovely things to the world.
Yeah.
But we don't have the power to change that.
But we can change ourselves, right?
Oh, that's all we can change. That's all we've ever been able to change. So, get busy, folks, is what, my message was,
And it says in the introduction, this little book is my Rawn's own statement of a positive vision of what it can mean to be a human being in a world of other beings. And that sums it all up in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful phrase. I really think that's a very, very important one of how we can be a positive force instead of a destructive force. Yeah.
It's just so easy. That's part of my message around initiation and hermetics too, is everybody is like, oh God, it's so hard. Oh, how will I ever do this? Only superhuman godlike being can do that. Bullshit. It's easy. This is what human beings are designed to do. There's nothing in initiation to hermetics that a human being can't do. In our natural state, we've just convinced ourselves that we can't do these things. We have the habit of thinking that we can't do that, so we can't do that. That's the hurdle right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so much of
Rawn,
is unlearning.
Exactly. Rawn, this was a great 70 minutes in your
already.
Thank you so much. Yeah, time flies.
It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure on my end as well, and I'm sure a real pleasure for everybody listening to us.
Okay.
I'm really glad I picked up Facebook 3 weeks ago and contacted you.
Me too.
Thanks for that. Well, good luck for everything that you are doing and will be doing. And say hello to Blau or Blue, your feline companion.
Yes.
She was, or he, it's a he, I believe, right?
Yes.
He was very silent this time, so I was wondering, well, maybe that's the last question. Why are most of magic people cat people?
Well, because they're cats,
Exactly.
Well, see, I'm a dog person too. I go for a walk. I go for a walk most days, and every dog I see and meet along the path, because people walk their dogs all the time, I'm down on my knees saying hello. Like everyone. So I'm a dog, but hey, I'm an all animal person. I don't discriminate.
That's good.
If a squirrel
we should never do that. Exactly. And ravens, I like ravens too. They speak to me often. Yeah.
Oh man, in crows. I have a long-standing relationship with crows. When I lived in Berlin, we used to go out every morning and every afternoon too, when we were walking our dog, feeding the crows peanuts. We spent as much on peanuts every day as we did on food, practically.
I'm sure you did.
All the crows in the neighborhood would be following us as we go for a walk.
Right. I work on cemeteries, of course, because I'm a funeral celebrant, and so when I go ahead of the conduct to the grave, there are so many crows in the Viennese cemeteries, and they all start speaking to us there when we walk there. It's so very interesting.
Oh, they're wonderful. Yeah.
No, but we are completely driving off now.
Okay.
But that's good. We should do that. from time to time. Well, gents, that was the interview, and thanks again, Rawn. Thanks for your time, for being with us.
My pleasure.
And
My pleasure.
And all the best to you and all what that's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cold ground, I leave you now.
Heart by artist Ackerman. That was the last piece of music that we heard here today on episode 11 of the Thoth Hermes podcast season 8, where my guest was Rawn Clark, and we were talking about many Bretonian and many other things as well. Thanks, Rawn, for being here with us today. I really appreciate that you so spontaneously, when I wrote to you, said yes. I really wasn't expecting to get that quick an answer like I did back then. But that's often the best moments that you live, when you can do things so spontaneously. It was great to have him, and I hope all of you who were listening enjoyed it just as much as me and learned just as much as me also again this time on the show. So this was this week's episode of the Thoth Hermes podcast. I guess you want to know what's coming up next. Well, with pleasure. Next week, my guest will be Thea Wersching. Thea is also from California, from the LA area. She has written extensively on the tarot, but her All-American Tarot that was published recently is a very special type of tarot where of course, the Renaissance, American Renaissance Tarot, it is properly called. We're talking about that period of American Renaissance and all the occult implications. Edgar Allan Poe will play an important part in that. A very special topic, a very interesting topic with a highly intelligent and interesting woman. So don't miss that. Come back next week. And I hope in the meantime you will be having a nice time. Thanks for listening here today. Thanks for coming back next week. And for now, take care, stay tuned, hear you soon.